Hey everybody, welcome to the third ACM at UC general body meeting of the semester. If you haven't grabbed pizza yet, come on up and grab it. If you have grabbed pizza, hold off a little bit because we don't have a whole lot left, so we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to get some. If you haven't done so yet, you should go to acm@uc.org/c and check in. That's important. That's how you're going to get voting rights, and you need to check into at least 2 meetings if you want to be listed on our member directory on our website. So a quick heads up, just like we've done at our past 2 meetings, you are being recorded. We've got a camera back there. You can see I've got a mic on, and we're also recording the screen because what we're going to do after the meeting is we're going to post the videos to YouTube. You can go to youtube.com and search for ACM at UC, and our videos so far this semester will come up, and you can watch them in their entirety. We are also going to be posting everything to our GitHub archive following the meeting. So if you missed it or you want more details on something, you'll have access to the slides and the recording. And if you have any questions, you can just go ahead and ask at any time. So if you weren't at our last meeting, we rolled out the ACM at UC member directory, which I think is super cool. It's a way to get yourself listed on acm@uc.org. You can just go to that website and click on the members portion, and you'll see it. If you go to our GitHub directory, again, I believe there's a link to our GitHub directory on the website, right, Isaiah? There's a link to the GitHub directory on the website, the GitHub project? No? Okay, well, we'll make one. But regardless, if you search us on GitHub, it'll come up. You can go to the members directory, and there are instructions there for adding yourself. You have to actually go in and make a pull request on GitHub to add yourself to the website. So it's a cool way to actually apply some programming skills, and we'll add you as soon as you have 2 meetings and you've made that pull request. So I just want to reiterate that ACM at UC offers a handful of academic services. Our big one is office hours, which are Mondays from 6 to 7 and Thursdays from 1 to 2. And we are in Rhodes 802A, which is like the fishbowl by the 801 lobby. So you'll see us in there hanging out. Just knock on the window, or usually we'll try and have the doors propped open. So come in if you just want to hang out and work on homework with us. If you have a question about one of your courses or you're prepping for a test, come on in. We've got some upperclassmen in there, and we will do our best to help you out. Slack is another big thing ACM at UC does. If you are not a member, you are missing out. We post things like hackathons in there, contests like Hacktoberfest, opportunities for internships and full-time positions. So definitely join Slack if you haven't. You can go to acmcincy.slack.com/signup, or just go to our website and find the link there. You'll sign up, and then you'll have access to all of our pre-existing channels, plus the freedom to make any of your own. It's pretty cool. And I am gonna, without further ado, hand it off to Dom.
Yay.
There you go.
Okay, what's the deal?
So you just have to clip it somewhere.
Cool. This is fancy. All right. Hello. So my name is Dom Ferralino. I'm the Vice President of ACM at UC this year, and here's a little bit about me, some of my main interests. So I'm really interested in web browsers and browser internals, as well as web standards. My last co-op was at Mozilla in California. I'm also interested in C++, algorithms, and operating systems. And today I'm going to be talking about HTML and CSS, but mainly HTML. So who is just amped to learn about HTML? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Some hands. Okay, sweet. So we're going to be working with a repository that we created on the ACM at UC GitHub organization. But first I want to talk about some of the parts of what we're going to be covering. So part 0 of this, which is not actually part of the coding portion, we're just going to be talking about like what the web is. So the web is just a basic platform where we can use 3 different languages to create content for people to see. The 3 different languages are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So they all have a unique thing. They all work together with each other. HTML defines the structure and the content that appears on the page. We use CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, to actually determine how to style the content that HTML gives us. And then we use JavaScript to actually make it interactive and load things on demand and add interaction to the website to further augment the user experience, as it were. So today we're going to be covering mainly HTML and then a little bit of CSS, just so you guys are aware. So the beginning of part 1, I just want to talk about what HTML is. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is a really old markup language that a physicist created to share academic documents on the internet. Basically, it's just a string of characters and kind of odd symbols, and it represents something that's going to appear on the page. So how does the browser actually use this? Well, you write HTML in a file, and the browser takes this in and it parses it. So it parses it and it creates an in-memory model of what the page should look like given what you gave it as your HTML. And then it renders this model of all your elements on the page. So I want to first start by showing you how to go ahead and get the repository that we're going to be using today. So first of all, can everybody see this, or is that, yeah, probably not, no. Is this a little better? Can people see this, the command line? You can read it, awesome, okay. So like I said, we had a repository on the ACM at UC organization repo, and to get it, you can use our previously acquired git skills that we covered in the meeting by just running git clone and then either https ://github.com acm at UC web-primer. That's going to pull down the repository, or you can also get it via SSH if you'd like. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so this is going to pull it down into the web primer folder here. So it consists of three things: a README, a license, and an index file. And it starts here on branch. You can see branch part 1. And there's actually 8 different branches. So we have part 1 through part 8, and then there's the master branch, which is just like everything that's just combined. So we're going to step through this thing just one branch at a time. This talk is intended for it to be more of a conversation as opposed to like a formal talk. We're just going to be talking about what HTML is, some of the elements. If you guys want to see something on screen, we're going to go over it, talk about how the browser kind of works with some of these HTML elements, things like that. And then we're going to just slowly build our knowledge of HTML up from part 1 to part 8. And so I'm going to write some stuff, and you guys can follow along and save it, and then we'll open up in the browser and check the differences out. But ultimately, if you fall behind at any point, you can always just check out the next branch, and you're automatically up to date with everyone and with myself. So the branches are going to help that kind of thing. So, all right. Before we get in the code, yes. So how does the browser use it? So HTML consists of, like I said, a string of characters and these weird symbols. And these weird symbols I was talking about are these opening tags and the closing tags, these little hairpins, as some people call them, or angled brackets. And to denote something on the screen, we use this syntax, right? So this whole thing here is called an element. These are some pictures from MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, just in case you guys want to do some further exploration. But pretty much the content of a tag is going to exist inside its opening and closing tag. But the element itself is going to be the content plus the opening and closing tags. It may seem really simple. Well, okay, and then the tag name here is P, which stands for paragraph, and that's going to exist in between the angle brackets. But there's also some more complex things we can do with an HTML element tag. For example, we can add attributes. Just about every HTML element that exists that is implemented in web browsers, you can add all kinds of attributes to. In this case, we're adding the class attributes. Class and ID are really common if you know some stuff about web development prior to this talk. There are also element-specific attributes that work together with a certain HTML element. So like I said, the name of the tag is going to be in between the open and the thing right after the angle brackets and the open and close tag. The content's going to be inside. There's also some empty tags, which don't actually have close tags and don't require a closing slash. And they're just going to represent something that's going to be imported on the screen, so they don't actually have internal content. So now we start coding. So I'll give everybody a second to kind of grab the repository. Does everybody have the code, or are we waiting on anybody? Does anybody want to grab the code? All right.
If anybody needs help setting up Git,
yeah, if anyone needs some help setting up Git, let us know. If anyone needs help pulling it down, it's not working, or using the command line or the terminal. Yes, Noah?
Can you show how to clone the repository?
Yeah, I just did. One more time, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Go to the repo on GitHub and then show how to clone it.
Show how to clone it on GitHub.
It's like show the link that you can just copy.
Oh, like actually like
Clone,
download it?
yeah.
Sure. Okay, yeah. So if you want, you can go to github.com/acm at UC. This is our organization account /web primer, and you can fork it if you'd like to make changes. You can clone it, then download the zip file of it and stuff like that to get the files if you don't want to use the terminal to actually pull it down on your computer. So if anybody needs help getting started, this is this can be definitely pretty interactive if we want it to be. So yeah, if anybody wants to needs help pulling this down, definitely let us know. Okay, I'm going to assume everyone's got it. So I just want to briefly talk about the tools I'm going to be using today. So as far as the text editor, I mean, I'm just going to be working in this HTML file, and then we're going to be using a CSS file a little bit later on to manage the styles of our page. So I'm going to be using the text editor called Vim that's just going to appear inside of our index page here. So I'm just going to be using it like this to actually modify things. So this is the HTML page that we start with. This is in part one, the part one branch of the repository, and Vim index. Where are we? Okay, so yes. So if I edit this, I just want to show you guys like what is actually going on in a basic HTML file. This is pretty much one of the most simple HTML files you can create. So like I said, we start out with these cool things that are tags that are denoted by these angle brackets, and the browser is going to parse this and create a model of what you created in memory so it can display it on screen. But before we actually just start writing content and, you know, my name is Dom and all this kinds of stuff, we actually want to tell it kind of like what kind of document we're looking at. And so we denote this by the doc type tag up here, which is a special tag. We give it the HTML like name here, so it knows that it's an HTML file. Now, HTML is written in a very hierarchical fashion. So we can have nested elements and trees of content on the page. So we're going to wrap every single thing in one root element. That's going to be the HTML element. You can see that it actually is going to span from the second line down to everything. Everything's going to be inside the HTML element. And inside here, we have two child elements. So we have the head element and the body element. Now, the head element is basically for things that aren't actually going to appear on the screen, and the body element is going to be for things that do appear on the screen. So the head is going to consist of things like the title and like the character set that the browser should be using to encode this file, which isn't always necessary. Some like metadata about the site for like search engines to parse and things like that. Also, if we're going to require in assets like style sheets, like a CSS file to manage the styles of our page, or JavaScript, we're also going to declare the stuff in the head. You can also put it elsewhere, but it's semantically proper in the head. And then the body is where things that we actually want to be displayed are going to go. So we have all these cool like HTML elements that we talked about. One we talked about was the paragraph tag earlier, right? There's the P element, and this stands for a group of text. But there's all kinds of different ones. So what if we have a paragraph? Like really common thing that we want is to have a header on top of that paragraph. So we can sort of say like, oh, this is some article, and then here's the actual article content. And so we can denote a header with the H1 through H6 tags. And then inside is going to go the actual content, right? So we can see that here we have H1, ACM Web Primer, and then we close H1. And we do this for H1 through H6. And this is just going to give us 6 different header tags right off the bat. And I'll show you the difference between all these 6. But also, this is a comment in HTML. So like programming languages, you can kind of have a comment to leave some editorial information for editors and people reading your code so they can know what's going on. So if you can comment out large blocks of things in HTML. These are multi-line comments. So if I want, I can add like, you know, an H3 here, and like it's not going to be parsed by the browser. Like this is just not going to exist. So yeah, this is how we do a comment in HTML, and these are some header tags that we're going to use and that we'll see. So we can, let's see, if I want to open this, let's see, I actually think I might. This probably isn't the best way to do it. Okay, cool. So here's the index file that we had seen before. So this is the H1 through H6. You can see that basically the main difference between these 6 elements is that the font size decreases. And this is just a default browser thing that we see. The browser actually applies its own default styles. We haven't really talked about CSS and styles yet, but we will talk about some of the default styles that the browser will apply to these things. So this is basically the difference between the H1 and all the other tags down to the H6. So let's see. Okay, so the next section that I want to cover, we're going to be modifying this file a bit, is we're going to be talking about like kind of how we actually group content on the web. So we see some things like H1s and like some paragraph tags and stuff like that. But what if I want like a section of code, right? So like we go to Google Plus, right? we've got all these little things here. Okay, this is a box, this is a box, this is a box. So there's grouping, there's a natural ordering that's kind of happening in the layout of this website. And the developers are using something to kind of facilitate this in an easy way. And so we're using another tag called the div tag in What? Is that me?
Yeah, you got a call.
I got a call. All right. I don't see it on my phone. Okay, well, anyways, great. So we have the div tag. Okay, so this stands for a page division. So everything that's going to be in this kind of page grouping that we have is going to go inside this div tag. And so we can have a paragraph inside here if we want, right? A paragraph, I can open and close the paragraph. I could say Dominic Farolino is awesome and stuff like that. So when I open this up in the page and I refresh the page here, so we're going to see Dominic Farolino is awesome. It's in a slightly different font and like style than like the headers is, because that's like, I mean, a pretty natural thing. We want the paragraph to be in like plain readable text, and it's actually going to be bigger than something like the H5 and the H6 here. So that's like largely like how we like group things in the web. A lot of things like div is like one of the most common HTML tags ever. So if you need a new grouping of content, a lot of times you'll use div. Now there's something special about div and paragraph elements, and it's what I'm referring to is that they're block elements. So what this means is that a block element means that like it takes up by default the entire width of the page. Therefore, they're only stacked on top of each other and they don't naturally sit side by side. So if I use the element inspector inside Chrome here, which you can get to by right-clicking and going on inspect here, you can see like this element, when I hover over it, takes up the whole page. So the next block element is just going to go right below it. And the next block element is going to go right below it. And the parent that wraps all of these, the body, is going to be right here, just taking up, again, the entire width. But there are a couple other things that we can use in here to actually have content sit side by side. And so we're going to use non-block elements. We want to use inline elements. And we can see an example of an inline, excuse me, of an inline element. But instead of using the paragraph element, we can use the span element. And content in the span element is going to sit next to other inline content. So like this defines a new section of inline content, which is going to, by default, sit next to other inline content. So remember this paragraph that we had here is going to take up the whole width of the screen, and the span below it is just going to sort of take up what it needs. So if I add another span right next to it, span is really cool. This is a very truthful web page, haha. We can see that I've defined two elements, and I can actually just have them sitting like below each other if I want, and then go back to the page, and we see this creates one line. So by default, these are not block elements, but instead they are span elements, which are inline. So the classification of layout here is inline. That's kind of how we can create side-by-side content on the web. There's another really cool thing that we have access to in the web, and that is the idea of lists. So we have like unordered and ordered lists, okay? So if you want to go to the grocery store and make a list of something you number it and like have some growing list of information, or you can have an unordered list, which is a big pile of bullet points. It's very like self-explanatory, some of the stuff on the web. So the tag name for an ordered list is just going to be OL, and we're going to close it with an OL. And inside of this, we could put all kinds of stuff if we want, but the natural child to this is list items. So it's going to be LI and close LI. So these are some really fundamental tags that the web consists of. So inside here we can say, okay, item, we can say ordered item 1. And if I want to add another element below it, I can just add one more, and I can kind of just keep this up as much as I want. And what we're going to see on the actual rendered page of this is a basic ordered list here. So the browser is going to be smart enough to parse these list items in the order in which they appear and kind of keep some bookmarking in the back and be like, oh, okay, this is the first one, this is the second one. And it's going to just, by default, put these things that we didn't even really ask for, besides saying we wanted an order list, right next to them. So it's going to say 1, 2, and 3. The browser just sort of puts these in as it chooses. So let's see. Oh, okay. We also have the idea of unordered lists on the web. This is UL instead of OL. And pretty much the exact same thing is going to happen inside of these things. So we can create more list items and say this is a test. You can add a bunch of children here. And you can see now I have an ordered list preceding an unordered list, and they both have a bunch of list items. And again, everything is opened and everything is closed, everything is hierarchical. The browser is going to parse this properly and show us two different lists here. The unordered lists by default have this bullet point that we can change if we wish. So right now I'm actually going to reset everything and check out part 2. So if you want, you can check out the part 2 branch of this. And what we're going to see is pretty much, oh, never mind. Let's check out part 3 because I skipped ahead a little bit. So part 3 is going to have pretty much what we just did, right? So we have like a couple paragraphs, a div, an ordered list, an unordered list. Nothing new here. So we see how we can actually add content to our site. We just represent it in this markup language, and the browser can build it behind the scenes as it chooses. Okay, I think I actually am getting calls here. Sorry. Oh, okay, so awesome. So yes, now I want to talk about adding actual media to your website. So we've seen like plain text content. We can add this all day long. We can add divs, all kinds of stuff like that. But what if we want to add something like an image or something like that? This shouldn't be too difficult like it would be in perhaps other platforms. So I'm just going to go outside of this div, because we can create this outside the div, and we are going to learn you a thing or two about the image tag. Okay, so the image tag is one of those tags I mentioned earlier that is it's an empty tag. It doesn't actually have an open tag and a closed tag. It's going to just look like this, and it has a couple attributes. So we saw the class attribute in the very intro slide, but we can add a source attribute here. And this is actually going to take a URL, either relative or absolute, to some sort of content, and it's going to fetch that content and insert that picture right where this image link is. So this is just a placeholder representation of the image that's actually going to appear. So let's go ahead and maybe go to google.com, and I just want to take this logo right here. So we have the source attribute on the image link, okay, the image tag. And if I double click that, that's going to give me an yeah, so it's a relative. I don't want the relative. All right, let's call an audible. Let's use me. So my lovely face is sitting upon this browser here. Okay, so we can go to the source attribute, and I can actually add a link to my face here. And so like I said, this is just going to be a placeholder representing the image that exists at this link. And when I refresh the page, ta-da, there is my face. We can actually go a step further with this, and the image attribute the image tag has a couple image-specific attributes that we can give it. So, for example, a width and a height. So most attributes are going to be in the form of like the attribute equals, and then inside a string, something that tells us how to describe that attribute. So in this case, we can make it 40 pixels by 40 pixels. You can use the units like pixels, percentage, and pretty much anything that CSS supports, I believe, which we'll cover later. So if I make the width and the height of this 40 pixels by 40 pixels, we get a tiny DOM down at the bottom here. So yes, now the problem is, so what happens if this picture gets moved or something like that, or I give it a bogus link and I try to view the web page, right? This placeholder content is going to be, the browser is going to be confused. It fetches something that probably 404'd and doesn't exist, and as a result, it just has this crappy, nasty little default icon. The image attribute or tag also has this cool attribute that is technically required by the HTML specification called the alt attribute. And inside is a string of alternative text to display in the case that the image fails to respond in a manner appropriate for the browser to parse. So we can say, oh, oops, this should be DOM here, or something like that. And then when it displays, so the browser says, oh, it can't use this, and we do have an alt attribute. Let's display this text instead. So this is pretty important when content fails on the web, to add something to describe a failed web page. It's actually often overlooked and, like I said, technically required by the HTML spec, though the browser won't yell at you, as it never does. So, yeah, okay, there's the image attribute. Now we also have the video attribute. So if I want to add like moving content to the screen, not just an image, like a standstill image to go in there, HTML5 defines the video tag, and it looks just like this. And apparently it's too new for Vim to recognize as a real tag. And it's gonna act similar to how the image acts with the source attribute. It doesn't actually have a source attribute on it, but instead it has a whoops, where are we? Okay, a source element that goes inside. Whoops, source. And this itself has a source attribute, and we can actually give it the source of some sort of video online. And then the attributes that go on the video element. So like you think of YouTube, you have like controls and like whether like the video is going to autoplay or not, and like whether it's muted and stuff like that, full screen, stuff like that. We can define that in the form of attributes. That's what makes HTML like so extensible. So we can say like we want controls here, and we would normally set this to like controls true or something like that. But really what we want is just anything that's just truthy or not falsy. So if I give it an empty string, that's going to work as long as it's not false. I can also give it just straight up just the controls attribute, which is going to, the browser is going to set the controls attribute equal to the empty string, which again is truthy. So a lot of times you'll see like attribute names with nothing actually specified after them. That just means set it in some way, set it, as opposed to unset it. So I'll show you the video element here. I don't actually remember. We have some links for the video that we use, so we can go ahead and just reset the current changes, and I'm going to go ahead and check out part 4. So we're moving along swimmingly. And so inside index.html, it's like we have the image thing that I showed you with some alternative text. And these are some GIFs that me or Noah added last year. But here's the video element, and here's a little bit more of it being shown. And I'll explain some of these attributes here. So we have the width and the height, very self-explanatory. The controls attribute, which we could equally set by doing this. And then the poster attribute, which is kind of like the source of what's going to be displayed when the video actually isn't playing. So kind of on like the paused screen. And then we have a couple source attributes. And the way the browser is going to work with these is it's going to try every source from top to bottom until it finds one that works. So in this case, it's going to try to play the MP4 version. For some reason, it either doesn't exist or the browser can't play MP4. It's going to try, we've added this OGG form of the video, and then we have a WebM, and then finally we have plain text saying, sorry, you suck and can't play this video. And then, yeah, so that's basically it. And then we close the video tag, and that's what we get. And what we see when we actually refresh the page here is, so here are the two images that we must have applied, and then here's the alternative text that we talked about a little bit ago. But here's the video. So like I didn't have to create this like play button or like this slider or like all this like fancy like logic that like toggles all this stuff. This is like some of the browser defaults. The video element, this stuff comes out of the box with the video element. You can style it yourself and like make all these kinds of changes, but like there's some stuff kind of in the back end of that the browser is doing magically for us. And we can hit the play button. You can see, yeah, looking good. So that's not cool. That's the other one. Okay, well, it should work, and that's how the web works. Yes, awesome. That's weird. Is it really not playing? Yeah, it's not playing. All right, well, I guess this isn't the first time nothing went perfectly in a talk someone gave. Anyways, it worked last year, I promise. Okay, so we've covered a lot of different elements here to actually give our website like a lot of cool content. We've covered like grouping elements. Yes.
So when you're trying to add a link for the video onto, say, the website, how do you know if you can actually extract the video? Like, are there any sort of like protections on certain websites?
How do you know if you can extract the video?
Like, if you gave a link over to the website that has the video on, don't they have any sort of like protection mechanism that prevents you from doing that?
Oh, okay. So you're saying for like copyrighted content or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like how. Yes. Okay. I see what you're saying. So that's how. Yeah. Right. Out of the box, no. Like just giving a straight up link to the actual file, no. Because like if I visited this file here, like for example, if I typed this into the browser, it's probably not going to play it by default with like an MP4. Like it's probably not going to play in the browser. I think it's going to. Okay, well, great. But you could also just hit save as and like actually download the content. This is like an absolute link to the file on the server, which is not going to really give us any protection. But if you can obscure these links and add all kinds of sweet secretive.
It is.
Oh.
it's playing something.
Wow.
There it is. We don't see anything. That's a shame. Yeah. Well, also we could download like right here. So if in this kind of case, no. If it's just hosted like that, no. I don't know exactly how the protection mechanisms go like with that. But so for example, like Netflix though is like very secure, and like I know this is a controversial topic, but encrypted media extension is a standard that W3 is working on to protect just like DRM inside the browsers. That is the goal is to protect like web content, like videos that appear in the browser. So it makes it impossible for like people to strip like videos from Netflix or like movie sites from the browsers, if that makes any sense. So it like actually provides like a pretty secure management system for content on the web. But like given a regular URL that I'm going to use in like a video tag, like no, it's just like we just use it and there's no really protection to that.
Okay. What kind of format do they support? Like you're talking about this closed source like RMDB. Will what browsers support those?
Well, so it depends on the browser. This is like I believe browser specific, which is why we have multiple different things here. So if the browser doesn't support MP4, we fall back to OGG. If it doesn't support OGG, we fall back to WebM. So it's like I don't actually know if it's specified in the standard. I believe that you just like most browsers implement a array of like common extensions, and it's like the goal is for it to work in like every browser on the market, but like a lot of times we'll see fallbacks like how we see with this, especially when we dealt with like Flash content in the past and stuff like that. So but like a lot of like obscure like encoding methods and like extensions are not going to be supported. Like I don't believe MKV is supported out of the bat in the browser, off the bat in the browser. So it's like sort of like your big common ones, if that makes sense. But I mean, I'm sure that the answer to that, the real answer to that is probably very easy to look up. I just haven't done too much research into it. So we've covered some like how to add content to your site, whether it be plain text or like image or video. But I want to talk about some of the grouping, some more grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and actually, yeah, we can go ahead and edit this file here. So if you're still following along and you want to edit some stuff with me, we can go outside of this div here. And there's more like ways to group content on the web. A lot of it is largely semantic differences that we can use to just sort of like make our code easier to read. But like there exist things like the header element in HTML, which is going to be like by default for something like this on my site, like the header bar. And then like inside here, like there's also, for example, a nav element, which we can nest inside the header. And that is like a good way to provide maybe like a list, for example, an ordered list of like something like that, like we have for navigation. So for example, my site here, we have, I actually don't use the header element. For some reason I use div header here, but then we have some content, and then I have a nav container. So all of this stuff could be like, so and you can see in here I have the nav element, and it's more or less just an unordered list of list items, right? And this happens to be styled very well, just kidding, but styled in a way that's not default browser style, but you can see it's just using the same markup that we've seen before. We have divs and we have navs, but there's also a few other ways that we can group things on the web with, I mean, we just covered header and nav, but there's also the main, there's, what else we have? The section tag, and there's an article tag. And I want to talk about the difference between this. So in order to understand how a tag works, a lot of people go to W3 schools or something like that online to say, oh, like, here's a little introduction as to like how this tag works. But I want to introduce the HTML standard, which is like more easy to read than you might think and very not super popular with developers. So there is a developer version, but this is the specification that editors use to tell the browsers, hey, this is how stuff should work on the web. So this is how this HTML element should work. This is how the event loop should process JavaScript tasks and all kinds of stuff like that. But it has a nice section, number 4 here, called the elements of HTML. It talks about the HTML element, the head, the title, the base, everything, all kinds of stuff. And in here we have sections, right? So we see the article element. Again, largely a lot of this stuff is semantic. So the article element represents a complete, self-contained composition and document. Okay, great. The section element, right, represents just a generic section of a document or application, just ways to group our document more efficiently. And then we have the good old div element, which is like what most people use for this kind of stuff, just because it's very typical and very standard. And of course, the HTML spec goes a little hard on it by saying the div element has no special meaning at all. It stands for page division, and most people use it in wherever they can. But largely it's semantic differences and like how some websites actually parse your HTML. So if you have like an article, like a news article site, you're like The Guardian or something like that, and you want to write an article, you might want to wrap your article in an article tag, because I just learned today from Christian here in the front row that Google search can parse your document better if you have like some tags that it can expect more. So like if you wrap something in an article tag, it can make that more visually appealing on the search results page. So that should be section 5 here. So I can, if you'd like, still going along, we can go ahead and check out part 5. And you can see we have like just a basic demo of like the section article, or sorry, the section element and the article element with a header and a paragraph inside. If we want to see this stuff actually in the browser, again, we just have some more content down here. Nothing new. It's just basically the same as using a div. But the web is really cool in that we can use links to navigate around things. So that's what's really awesome about the web. There's no app store to go into to download google.com or to download youtube.com or anything like that. If I want to go to a new site, I can typically just create a link and then tell the browser, hey, go over here instead of right here. And so that's what the next thing we're going to be covering here is going to be. It's just links. So inside this section tag element, I'm going to go ahead and start just creating a link. So a link is denoted by the anchor tag, which has the letter A here as like its tag name. And it has a couple things. You have to tell it where to go. So for the image element, we said, oh, if you want to go somewhere to fetch this image element, go to where we see on the source attribute set, follow that. In the anchor element, we set the href attribute to wherever we want to take the link to take us. So for example, if we want to go to my site, we can just set this to domferlino.com. And then inside here is where I can actually put the text to display as that link. So I could say, go to Dom's site. And if your editor is cool like mine, it'll kind of realize that, oh, hey, this is inside a link, and make it look like a link for you. And so I save this here. And if I go back to the HTML, we can see it says go to Dom's site. It's purple because I've been to my site before, so it's like a visited link. You see that often. And if I click it, it simply just loads my site in the browser, and there's nothing else to it. So you can kind of like create this sort of content inside here and have it go places. There's also, yes?
Do I get to choose whether it goes to the new link on the same page or it opens in a new
Yes,
window?
that's exactly what I was going to cover. That's really good. So here, I want to, let's make another one go to Google. Google is very useful, so I don't actually want to overwrite like my page. I just want to go to it elsewhere. So there's another cool link anchor specific attribute called the target attribute. We can set this to _ blank. Very intuitive. And yes, and so inside here, oh, also I forgot to mention, apparently I haven't gone to google.com yet. That's interesting. But the anchor element by default is an inline element, so it's not blocked. So if I put a bunch of these next to each other, they will sit next to each other. If I want to make them kind of sit on top of each other or stack them, I can wrap them in something like a div or a paragraph. But that makes it really convenient to just throw links in the middle of paragraph text because it just sits alongside the text next to it. So here, if I want to go to, I guess I should change the title of this here, go to Larry Page's site, then I can click this, and target _ blank opens this into a new tab. So that's basically how we can link to content on the web and actually create links for ourselves to visit. And that's like the bulk of what we're going to be covering with HTML today, I want to go over CSS just a bit. So again, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So this is how we actually apply styles to the web. And I want to go back and talk about some of the first things we put here. Why is the H1 tag bigger than the H2 tag is bigger than the H3 tag? Why is this? Why is this the case? Well, we didn't write any styles for this. We purely gave it markup. But the browser has something called a default style sheet. Okay, so this is CSS that gets applied by default on HTML without me saying anything. And we can view it in the developer tools by going like right-clicking and going inspect. On a Mac, it's Command-Shift-I or Command-Alt, Command-Option-I. Yeah, sure. But if I want, I can use this element inspector in the corner here and view something on the page. So H2 here. And then below here, there's this little fancy style tabs. Chrome has really good developer tools, and it's going to show us the styles of all kinds of stuff here. So the user agent style sheet. These are styles applied by the browser default. This is the same thing as what I said, the browser's default style sheet. You can see its display attribute is going to be set to block, and we'll talk about like the specifics of how CSS syntax works in a bit. So it's a block element by default. It has a certain font size, which is 1.5 M. And then H3 is going to be a slightly smaller font size. H4 is going to be a slightly smaller font size. So this is nothing we actually like declared ourselves. It's just the browser has some styles that get just applied without us having to do anything. But of course, we want to make our site look good, and so we're actually going to overwrite the styles that come by default. We can do this inside the HTML file with the style element, where we can actually just write a new language inside this style, inside these style tags, which is going to be CSS. But we can also write, because this is going to get messy, right? If we have UI people working, like UI designers and developers working on the CSS, like the styles of the page, and then like engineers working on like the actual HTML that goes like within a web page, we're going to be touching the same file, and it's going to be kind of messy. So ideally, we would make this a separate resource that we fetch at parse time, and that's what we're going to do right now. So what I'm going to do here is create, just going to touch style.css. So this is going to create a new file called styles.css. And I want to tell my index.html file about this style sheet. So what I want to do is, I want to refer to this resource when the browser is parsing this HTML. And I'm going to do that with the link tag. The link tag is one of those things that represents something. Again, we want to fetch this external resource and pull it in our website. So we want to link to it, and we're not going to, it's just going to be a placeholder for that content. We're not actually going to have an open and closing tag with things inside of it. Just similar to the anchor tag, we're going to have an href attribute, which is going to be absolute or relative URL to, in this case, we're going to have the style sheet. So that's going to be style.css since we're in the same folder. And then we have to tell the link attribute what we're getting. Are we getting a style sheet? Are we getting like a picture, or what's going on? And because it can be used for multiple different things and multiple different resources. So we do this by saying how the resource relates to the page by setting the rel tag. At least I believe that's what it stands for. And this is going to be a style sheet. So the document has a big queue of style, or the browser has a queue of style sheets for each page. And we're going to say, hey, make sure you associate this page with this resource that you're fetching with the style sheet. And this should be all we need to get off the ground. Now when we go ahead and look in the developer tools, Chrome has this cool thing called the network tab. When I refresh the page, it's going to show us every resource, that actually every asset that got fetched from the server to get this. So if we just go ahead and refresh this, we see we make index.html, a request for index.html, and then we go ahead and make a request for style.css. This is initiated by the parser. It saw that link tag and it was like, oh yeah, let's go ahead and grab this resource. We need it for the page. So it went and grabbed it. Unfortunately, we don't have anything in it. So let's go ahead and start writing some CSS. I'm going to go into the style.css page. You can go ahead and check out the next part of this tutorial if you want to kind of skip ahead and look at how CSS works. But we're going to be writing it right now. So the goal is to target elements inside the HTML to apply my own styles to that are not the browser styles. So for example, if I want, I can say, the body element, I want to say, okay, let's look at the body element. So well actually here, I'll cover the basic CSS syntax. So we have a selector, and then inside brackets we have a property value semicolon. So this is like how CSS works. There's different kinds of selectors we can use, like element selectors, which we just specify the element name, body, h1, paragraph, something like that. Or we can use like classes and IDs, which we'll cover in a bit here. And but we'll start out with like the basics here. So in this case, I want to select the body element. There's only one, and I want to select it. So I'm going to open up these brackets here, and there's all kinds of CSS attributes. The entire list is massive, a few hundred I would assume. And you can look up all kinds of things that you can style, but things like font size, font style, font color, fonts like weight, background, how it actually is laid out, whether it's a block element, whether it's an inline element, the background color. So let's go ahead and define the background. We can say background color, and there's all kinds of different colors that CSS has like out of the box, like little weird name colors that I can use, like salmon and white smoke and Rebecca purple, just goofy things like that. Exactly. And but you can also use I like white smoke. But you can also use hexadecimal notation to denote this. So like this is a solid color for like a decent gray, I believe. So I can use like hexadecimal, and if I go ahead and refresh the page, assuming everything was loaded correctly. Oh. So maybe that's not what I was looking for. Great. Well, anyways, that shows something. Should be AO?
Yeah.
Okay. So that should be. So that, yeah. Okay, so that's what we want. So some ugly, gross gray there. We can also do RGB syntax, so RGB, and we can give it a red component, a green component, and a blue component. So whatever. Someone give me a number for like the red. Just anywhere between 0 and 255. 5. Wow. How about the green? 100. And blue. Yeah. 256. Let's just go wild and just make it 1,000. We can also add an alpha component here to give it a layer of transparency. And that's going to be the last element here, or last item here. Is going to be an integer, not an integer, like a double, I guess, ranging from some sort of decimal ranging from 0 to 1. So I can say 0.7. That's going to be a little bit more of a transparent whatever this color is here. And so when I go ahead and refresh the page, it's beautiful. And if I want this to be a little bit stronger, I could just make this either a 1.0 or just like 1, or leave it out and just say, let's just use the red, green, and blue components and no alpha. And it's still a little bit darker, a little bit stronger here. So we've just successfully changed the background color. But what if we want to target like elements in like another way, like that's not just like by their element name? So if, like I could do li and like make this like background color yellow. By the way, this is invalid, so I'm just going to remove it just for the heck of it. And we can make that like, it's just wonderful. Make this yellow on top of this blue. But what if I wanted to add like another way to, like what if I have some LIs that I want red and some LIs that I want green? We can actually use the HTML to kind of augment our style capabilities here. And this is where we're going to use classes and IDs. So I mentioned, li is just going to change all the LIs to do something. But I can say all the LIs with a class name of, let's see, class name of maybe new. Class name is going to be denoted by the period there to have a background color of green. This is just lovely. So this means all the, we're going to get more specific. So cascading style sheet stands for, or CSS stands for cascading style sheets, means the styles cascade down. So as I get more specific, these styles are going to take more priority. So if an element has the class of new and it's an li, this style is going to be applied because we're being more specific than this blanket style that's going to be applied. So I can go ahead and add a couple list elements down here. I can give it the class attribute of new, and I'll just go ahead and give a couple of this class attribute with the value new, and if I refresh the page, we can see some of them are green. In fact, the ones that are have the class attribute of new are going to be green. So so the classes in CSS are basically used to have a blanket statements across like our styles. So it's something like selected or like user content or like this box or something that's going to apply to a multitude of elements. But if I want to single out one or two, or just one really, for semantic correctness, we can use the ID here. I can say like give this element ID with the value special. And inside the style sheet here, I can say, well, I want to target a single LI that has the special ID differently than I would whether it's just like a regular LI in which like the blanket statement is going to apply down here. So I can actually specify IDs in CSS with the pound symbol. And this is pretty much as pretty much the main way you're going to actually apply styles on your page, either with an element selector. Whoops, I should probably give this a name. Special. So with an element selector, an element with a class like specifier, or an element with an ID specifier, and we can see the classes are specified with periods and the IDs are specified with hashes. And I can say the background color of this kind of element is going to be purple. Yay. And that's going to show, okay, so this was the one with the element with the special thing applied. And that's going to have an ID of background color purple because the style's applied to it. Now, like I said, classes are used for like multiple elements that are going to need to styled in a very uniform way on the page. IDs should be used primarily for a single element that it's just like one thing that stands out unique. I can, of course, I can have multiple HTML elements with the same ID, and they're going to behave just like a class would. But if you throw this through like an HTML validator, it'll yell at you. It'll say, hey, you should only, IDs are only for like unique things. Use classes instead, or use a different class name if you want to target a different sequence of elements. So it's more of a semantic difference as opposed to a functional one, but that's sort of how it should be used. There are all kinds of really elaborate and fancy CSS selectors to use, and so if I want to, like, CSS can give me a way to target the second paragraph of div childs that are the third child of an article element, and you can do all these crazy elaborate like things, and CSS is just going to sort of take care of it in the background, allow you to apply styles as you wish, and they are cascading in specificity and declaration order. So
is ID most
specific?
take the most precedent, yeah.
Yeah. So I believe if I like moved, yeah. So if I said like an LI with special up here to be like, yeah, background color, which I can just say with background purple, and then I get rid of like this. So just copy that. Technically, I defined LI after, so you might think that like the background color would be yellow, but I'm pretty sure since we went more specific first, the styles will not change on this page, and you can see they won't because we targeted this first. But however, if I did say like if I lit special, if I wanted to do this again and say like add a style with the same level of specificity, but with just something later on in the page that was declared, this is going to take precedence, and we're going to see something that's orange. If I want an older style to overwrite something that I know is being defined later on with the same specificity, I can use something kind of nasty called the important like modifier or keyword or something, and I can make this overrule like later and more specific styles. So this means any LI with the special ID is going to have purple, even though we defined orange later on down the list, and we're going to go back to purple. I can also do this up here. So again, this is the least specific one and the earliest defined one, but if I add important to it, then we're never going to see this style taking place, because the important thing is going to overwrite things or kind of overrule things, styles that are not also important. I can, of course, be really nasty and counter this. This is about as strong as I can get in CSS. There's nothing else I can do at this point. There's no double important or important squared or anything like that. So that's kind of how you can override styles. This is really common if you're working on somebody's like portfolio site or something like that, and there's some style sheets that are being applied much later, and they have a style that you don't want, and you want to overwrite them, and your style that you're going to inject in the page appears much earlier on. You can either try to be more specific with your selector, or add like important keywords to override later defined or more specific styles in a page. And the final part we're probably not going to have any time for, and this is we're just covering the CSS box model. It's not super relevant compared to just given the stuff we've seen today so far. So hopefully this gives you a decent sort of primer in HTML and CSS and sort of how things work, and you can actually build a really basic website with some content. I urge you to learn about some of the CSS selectors, learn about how you can change the width of things and change the font of things. For example, if I wanted to change the font of this page, just really simply, the browser has some defaults that some fonts that it kind of carries with it by default without me actually needing to add a link attribute that goes out and gets some other font from like an asset like a CDN or something like that. So for example, a decent one is Helvetica. And I can say, oh, font family in body is going to be Helvetica. Now again, this is cascading, so everything that comes under it that doesn't define its own font family is just going to take the font family on from the body. So when I go ahead and refresh the page, we see a little bit better here. Everything, all the fonts that have been changed on the page because we didn't specify this elsewhere. And so now we actually have something that's a little bit more, well, not presentable at all, but a little bit nicer. We can change things like the text align, we can center text, we can do all kinds of crazy stuff with CSS, and this is actually how websites like get made to like actually look good. Like things like real, like Google Plus, for example, really great looking UI. All this is just HTML, CSS. When we talk about the real functionality, even that can be done in CSS. When we talk about the real functionality of the page is when we get into JavaScript and stuff like that. But you can do a lot with CSS, and I urge you to check out things like background shadows and borders and all kinds of fancy stuff. So let's see, back to the slides. That should be about all we have. We are hosting a UC website competition, so the goal is to make the ugliest website you can. So in case you didn't realize, you get a gigabyte of free storage. This is what we're paying tuition for, people, on UC file space server. And everybody has their own free static website on the UC servers. And you can SSH into the server, modify your own like HTML page, just an Apache server that's running on a Mac OS machine. And then you can visit your website with this link here that are in the slides, and we'll probably talk about this in the Slack as well. For example, mine is homepages.uc.edu, and then it's just going to be / and then your 6+2. So this is my site. I overrode some of the defaults. But if I wanted to change this stuff with my newly curated web prowess, I could SSH into the server, which is just your 6+2 at UC file space. Okay, .edu. It's gonna ask me for my central like login password, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'm in. I can edit my index file, which is in the sites folder, and add things like this super chill. Yeah. And all I need to do is save it, and it's just a static site. So when I go ahead and refresh this actual page in the browser, and you go visit this as well, we're going to see something updated. So you can go ahead and add a static website. Go ahead, Kurt.
You don't have to use SSH. There's a web.
Okay, there's a web way to do it as well. But if you're cool, you're going to use SSH. I'm just kidding. Yeah. The next slide. Oh, the next slide. Okay, yeah. So, yes. Oh, look at that. So you can upload stuff. Look at that. We have a wonderful video showing you how to do it. Oh, I didn't know this existed. This is really cool. So yeah, if you log into UC file space, you can actually kind of have a web UI demonstrating just like the directory layout and everything inside, where you can upload files. Wow, that's incredible. So yeah, so we have some rules for the contest. The goal is to create the ugliest website you can. We're looking for crazy, gross things like gross borders and marqueeing text that floats across the screen and just nasty Windows 95 looking styles. We're going to be judging the most ugliest website by the exec and all the committee chairs as well. Anybody can compete except for the people judging, of course. So yeah, post your submission by linking to it in Slack and telling one of the execs or the exec or the committee chairs, or just emailing it to Kurt Lewis. Yes, the submissions end Wednesday, October 11th at 9:59 in case you can't read English, and the winner is announced the next day. And we have a Raspberry Pi for the winner of the world's ugliest website hosted on UC FileSpace. So I suggest you take your newfound web skills, get on it, and make the web an uglier place. The next meeting will be the day we're announcing the results of the ugliest site competition. It's going to be in Swift 819 at 6 p.m. as normal. And it's going to be a data science talk featured by a couple engineers at the startup that Noah works at, Downtown Astronomer. And that's it.